I'm Nick Cheshire and I'm here at VEITH 2019 and I'm delighted to say I'm sitting with Professor Matt Thompson. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks.
We're going to talk about the future of endovascular sealing. So Matt, when did you first become aware of the problems with EVAS and with Nellix, and what was the company's response to that?
Yeah, good question, Nick. So I initially started with Nellix or EVAS when I was in the UK as a surgeon, and have subsequently moved into industry. And I guess my journey with Nellix and with EVAS has been a real rollercoaster one. It was introduced into commercial practice 2013, got very quickly adopted by a large number of centres. 1 year results were excellent, but then actually we started sealing failure modes at 2 years of migration and endoleak, and it was around that time that I became involved with the company and certainly played a role within trying to understand those failure modes. So like many companies, there was an analysis done of these failure modes, root cause investigation by R&D departments, and the various engineers became involved, and we found that in particular aneurysms, particularly those with a small flow lumen, you simply weren't getting enough polymer into the aneurysm sac to surround the stent to give the stent the rigidity it needed to stay within the aneurysm neck and prevent migration in the long term. So in terms of moving forward, that was a finalisation of root cause analysis, and a decision was made at that time that we could mitigate the vast majority of those failure modes by altering the anatomical indications for use for the EVAS product, Nellix.
And how did you feel personally about that emergence of that failure problem? I mean, you were an experienced clinician and you'd done lots of these.
Yes, I was, and I suppose if you were to design the worst case scenario for a medical device, it's a device that can solve a problem that is an unmet need, that has really excellent acute and 1 year results, and then you start to see a failure mode later on in the life cycle of that product, and that obviously is hugely problematic as there's large number of patients who has the device at that stage.
For sure.
So that's a difficult situation, and obviously one needs to think about how you move forward with the therapy, but also how you look after the patients who've had that device implanted.
Of course. So you have a new IDE, I think, currently working essentially on a new anatomical IFU. Tell me about your role in the development of that.
In terms of moving forward with EVAS, which we regard as a potentially transformative therapy in the longer term, one has to, I think now, given the lessons of a commercial rollout in Europe, need to be very considered and very careful about how we accrue evidence for this therapy. And the real learnings for Nellix are that patients do well if they're within the refined anatomic indications for use, but also there's an element of doing the procedure in a good way, and we've had some learnings from early experience in what constitutes a technically good procedure, what perhaps constitutes a technically inadequate procedure, and what we're trying to do with the current IDE is to apply those lessons to the new study. So patients need to be on the new anatomic indications for use, but also we need to ensure that they get a technically adequate procedure. And what we're trying to do is replicate those results in the longer term, and they're our learnings from our earlier studies.
Are there other developments in the area of sealing, whether that's the sac, the polymer, etc., that are also going to change the future of this?
I think so. So we obviously have a product iteration line that goes from the current EVAS 2 study, which is Nellix. We have an FDA approved IDE study for complex aortic repair using EVAS, which is another approval cycle that we will go through to treat patients with juxtarenal, pararenal and suprarenal aneurysms. And then obviously
with a chimney, essentially.
Yeah, with a combination of chimney techniques allied with the current Nellix product. And then our pipeline obviously involves adopting sealing technology on a different platform. So internally we call that our next generation product. We're working through the development cycle of that at the moment.
We touched on it a second ago about late failures, but tell me something about your journey from being an academic surgeon to being in the industry now. How does it feel, and what have you learned from both sides?
Yeah, no, fascinating journey for me, and certainly a big change in what I do on a day-to-day basis from 3 years ago. I think the lessons are that the transition for me, certainly from academia into being a chief medical officer, actually is not the leap that many people think it is. Certainly I do very little now in terms of clinical practice, but in terms of applying data, applying statistics, applying good clinical practice and judgment of how to interpret complex data sets, that's really a lot of my job at the moment, to look at safety, look at performance, look at the efficacy of our products. And I guess I look at it, Nick, that rather than impacting maybe 100 patients a year with what I did clinically, I now have this great opportunity to influence developments in a new therapy going forward that potentially impacts thousands of patients.
Okay, Matt, well, great. It's very good to see you, and thank you for your time this morning.
Sure, thanks, Nick.